This is Cadillac Unscripted on 107.9 CDY. It's sponsored every week by Independent Bank. Katie Huckle is my co-host, and Katie, we have done this approximately 230 times over the last 4 years.
Wow.
This is the one show that I have no idea how to jump into it.
Right.
Yeah. So we have an organ donor and an organ recipient with us today.
We do, and what an incredible journey they have had.
And we're going to talk about that in the next 30 minutes.
So welcome, Dave and Kevin, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
So let's start at the beginning.
Let's do.
So you have a portion of your liver, and Kevin got a portion of your liver, but Kevin's body rejected it, but it's still a great story because Kevin's got a liver. And so let's talk about this. How did it all start? Mm-hmm. Who wants to begin?
I have a autoimmune disease called PSC, which is primary sclerosing cholangitis. And what PSC does is it attacks the bile ducts coming out of the liver and causes strictures so that it doesn't drain the way that it should. Because it's not draining the way that it should, the bile backs up into the liver and it causes cirrhosis, and that eventually kills that organ. There's over 200 functions that the liver does, and it affects your whole life.
And I am assuming you learned everything and anything there was that the liver does over the past relatively short period of time.
Yeah, you'd go to the doctor and you'd say, hey, doc, I've got this going on or that going on. They say, yeah, that's your liver.
Okay.
And so there was a lot of, yeah, that's your liver.
Correct.
Wow.
And the PSC has a tendency to mask itself. The main way that you diagnose this would be through a lot of lab work, and the PSC kind of covers over the worst of it.
Oh.
And so at the time of the transplant, I asked the surgeon, so what was the condition of my liver? He says, well, it was horrible. You were looking for a crash. Well, the lab work didn't reflect that.
Incredible. Okay.
So at what point did you know that a transplant was going to be in your future?
There is no cure for PSC.
Mm-hmm.
And so initially when we discovered that's what we were dealing with, they said, we can treat the symptoms, we can treat the things that are going wrong with your body because the liver isn't functioning, but ultimately you're going to need a transplant. And that was pretty hard when we first learned that. I'm generally not an emotional guy, but we left the doctor's office, and my wife and I went to our favorite restaurant, Chick-fil-A, and
Yum.
I broke down crying at the table. It's like,
oh boy.
So it's a hard pill to swallow.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so Dave Johnson, where do you come into this story? Go ahead and spin that around if you could, if we can hear you a little better.
Every Friday night, my mother-in-law hosts family dinner night, and Kevin is part of the family. So, they're not there every week, but the week that they got the diagnosis, he came and gave us the update. Donna, my mother-in-law, has what we like to call the report. And so when you get the report, so we, even on the weeks when he wasn't there, when we were all assembled, we would get the report. Kevin's going to see this specialist. He's going to see this person. And so Kevin came one night, I think it was 2021. Kevin came one night with Janet, his wife, and he explained, the diagnosis and what he was going to need. And it was the weirdest thing in the world because I just sort of felt like, okay, yep, he's going to need a transplant and it's going to be my liver. And I had, he's not a blood relative, so I had no idea on that front. I texted my doctor, the joys of small town medicine. You can text your doctor and be like, hey, what would I need for this test? He's like, oh, simple blood test. We first figure out what blood type you are. So added that to my, physical paperwork for that year. And I just sort of knew, but we had to wait a while because they were going to try to work through family members, blood family members, and things like that for a while first. So I just sort of had that epiphany that it was going to be mine, and then.
But during that period of time, you knew you were down the list. You would be down the list, pending all these other checks they had to do.
Correct.
Right? Okay.
Yeah. So the last summer. Probably around now, last summer, was when I finally was like, okay, I'm going to apply to get in this program. And, we invited Kevin over for family dinner night. They don't always come because in this particular case, he was pretty immunocompromised as well. So, wanted to keep him away from large groups and things like that, but invited him over. He came over and we chatted in my mother-in-law's back room about, what steps I would need to take. He got a friend of his on the phone that had just been through the process, but was not eligible to donate at that point, so that I could ask them some questions as well. And then we just started moving forward.
Wow. What were the chances that you would be statistically a match? Do you know?
It's a weird higher because I learned I was type O negative. So
okay.
I'm the universal donor for blood type, and apparently that translates over to organs as well.
Okay.
So that shot me up the list. And I think that's why I was still relatively heavy at the time, but I think my blood type was one of the reasons Henry Ford at least asked to come see me, or for me to come see them, so that they could evaluate whether I could proceed. And so, yeah, so I think higher because of my blood type, but not being a blood relative, it was going to be a shot in the dark.
Okay. What did both of your wives have to say about this commitment?
My wife is incredible. She's very supportive. She has really taken good care of me through this transition, through this time. We had been praying for a donor. It was surreal, just how many people said, "Hey, I'll be your donor." I had been the manager at Vandry for 20 years. And, the number of coworkers that said, "Hey, what do I need to do? How can I help you? What does it take to become a donor?" People that I hadn't seen in quite some time, 10 years or more, were contacting me saying, "Hey, can I be your donor?" God is good.
Kindness comes back to you.
It does. It really, really does. So, of course, my wife was supportive right along through this whole process in, helping me to work. I had to go on disability in November, and I'm a workaholic. I love to work, and that really was a difficult thing for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. How about your wife, Dave?
Kevin was like a brother to my wife growing up.
Okay.
They were always hanging around, so she was pretty supportive. And you guys have both known me for a while and know that there's always a wacky Dave Johnson adventure somewhere to be had. So my wife was sort of like, "Okay, yeah, we're gonna do this one now. This is the year Dave is a liver donor. So next year, synchronized swimming.
What comes up on the Dave Johnson bingo card in 2025?
Right.
I guess we'll find out.
Stay tuned."
Can you tell us, because of course we want to hear about the procedure and the surgery and everything, but can you tell us about the preparation of physical and mental preparation prior to the operation?
For me, I was getting sicker and sicker. And I had somebody ask me the other day, "Hey, do you feel better now than you did before?" It's a hard question to answer because it's different. Before, I was in decline and didn't feel good because of the decline. And now a lot of times I don't feel good because my body is healing, and it's a different, you don't feel better, you don't feel worse. It's just kind of always there. As far as preparation goes, prior to the surgery, it was kind of a nervous, You're very thankful that this is going to happen, but you're not too sure that you want to go through with it.
How about you, Dave?
So when I was evaluated at Henry Ford, I passed all the tests. I had the MRI from heck. It was supposed to be an hour. I was in for 2. Funny story there. If you are ever told to breathe normally, you will at that point start second guessing everything you thought you knew about what normal breathing was. So, but I had lost about 30 pounds between the end of that school year and that August date where I went to Henry Ford, and they told me that I needed to lose about another 50. So, between Dancing with the Y Stars and all that practice, I'd already made some good inroads, but, pretty much from August until February is when I hit that 50 pound goal mark. So biggest preparation for me was losing about 80 pounds to be able to do it. And then at that point, mentally, it was just like, I hit that goal, and we still had 2 months before the surgery at that point, because we'd been trying to target April. And so at that point it was hard mentally to go, okay, well, I should keep going, which is great. But it was a lot of working out, getting up super early in the morning, I'm still doing that too, which is great. So I sort of became an athlete throughout the process, which was new for me, but it was a lot of working out, a lot of really trying to get my body in the best shape that I could possibly get it, to give him the best possible liver I could give him. And then once we hit that goal mark, a lot of like, dear God, is it April 22nd yet? So
Sure.
Just waiting for that day to come. I don't know about Kevin though, but as we got closer to the day, my medical leave started a few days beforehand from work. And as I was leaving work that day for basically the last time that school year, I just felt more at peace than I've ever felt in my entire life. And everyone said, oh yeah, the night before the surgery, we'll check in with you because you're going to be a nervous wreck. I wasn't. I went to bed. I woke up at, 4:30 in the morning, which was normal time for me at that point, because that's when I was getting up to work out. And I just felt through the whole thing, just this Zen peacefulness, like everything was going to be okay. And was not nervous at all. It was just mentally the preparation, all of that prep work, and knowing that I was going to be able to do something for another human. It was the weirdest Zen I've ever felt in my life. I don't really know how to explain it, but I just knew everything was going to be okay.
Is it maybe because you had such a long period of time to prepare for it that maybe that night before it was like, okay, here we go. We're going to be all right?
Maybe. I don't know. I don't know. I just knew it was all going to be okay. I had worked really hard. It was 1,000,000 to 1 odds. I'm making that up. I don't know what the odds were, but the odds of me being able to give him this were relatively much higher than they should have been, because I wasn't a blood relative. It just seemed like I cleared all the hurdles. I jumped through all the hoops, and it just felt like it was going to be okay.
The peace that passes understanding.
Kevin, did you have that same feeling the night before? Or did you ever reach that level of, here we go?
I did feel very much at peace about it. As Katie said, it's a peace that surpasses understanding. And being a person of faith, that definitely is something that I truly believe helped through this process. Dave was... the way they schedule these at Ford is the donor will arrive first, and then the recipient will arrive an hour later. Well, we had made a decision we were going to go together. We were going to go at the same time. And, we were joking as we crossed from the guest housing over to the hospital at Ford. They've got a wonderful guest housing there. And, we were making jokes about, Monty Python silly walks and all kinds of stuff. Dave has a way of keeping things light.
Yes.
And that made a difference.
Mm-hmm. He has a way of making people smile, this man.
Sure does.
Take us to the operation, to post-op, how you felt at that time.
Had a wonderful surgeon, Dr. Muhammad. We had met with him a couple of weeks prior just to discuss the surgery, discuss, options that we had. And he, looked at my numbers, looked at my condition, and said, you're a perfect candidate for robotic surgery. And I said, well, okay, tell me about that. He says, well, because you're receiving a living donor liver, it's smaller. We don't have to make as big of an incision. The robot is much more precise, and therefore you won't have as much scar tissue, and there's a lot of benefits to it. So we said, okay, we trust you, and let's do it. So when we went in, they did a lot of prep, obviously, shaved my belly, and here we go. Mm-hmm. The thought of being under anesthesia for 8 to 9 hours, which is usually what the surgery will take, kind of concerned me a little bit as far as, okay, how are they going to keep me out that long? Mm-hmm. But they know what they're doing. The surgery did not go well, and I went in, I don't know what time we arrived, but they apparently took me in about 10 o'clock after all of the prep, and it was early morning by the time I finally got into recovery, and the first surgery did not go well.
Was it because they knew right away that your body was rejecting it, or what were the circumstances?
Well, from what I understand, anytime they tried making a connection, the blood would clot, and so blood clots are the enemy of all of us. Mm-hmm. And so as they were trying to make those connections and dealing with the blood clots, and then not being able to do the connections that they needed to in the way that had to happen, they started, kind of innovating and trying to get it so that at least would work. I was the talk of the hospital. I joke about, when we go down there and talk to Dr. Muhammad and talk to the staff at Henry Ford, which was just an incredible experience dealing with them. They're amazing. They said, you're a miracle that you made it through that. I was very, very, very sick after that first surgery, and don't remember a whole lot after it.
Okay. And so then you come in where with that?
Well, Kevin's surgery was textbook what could go wrong went wrong, and mine was textbook like this is what a successful living donation should be. I went in, they opened me up. I've got a nice little slit down my stomach now, and they took out my right lobe of my liver, about 2/3 of it, and from start to finish, I don't know how long I was under, but everything went according to plan on my end. My wife said that the first thing I asked when I came out of it was, how's Kevin? And they didn't know at that point in time. And the teams at Henry Ford don't talk to one another. So this whole time, I kept telling them, oh, well, I know my recipient. And Kevin kept saying, oh, well, I know my donor. And they're like, that's great. But for our purposes, we're a team. We operate independently of the other teams. And my team actually ended up apparently in Kevin's OR helping out. So I went into my first night of recovery just thinking, oh, it took a little bit longer, but, and then it was the next day that we learned, everything was not going as well as it could or should have been.
And where do we go from there? I mean, it's just this harrowing, scary. You come out of it feeling like, okay, everything went well, and then you find this out. And it had to have just been devastating for you to learn that he was fighting. Yeah.
there was a possibility brought up that he may need another new liver while I was recovering at Henry Ford, and I just sort of buried it at that point. I was like, okay, well, we're not there yet, and we'll wait and see. But about a week later, when I was home recovering, we missed out on, apparently the nurse's favorite thing is when the donor and the recipient both end up in the recovery ward, because they like wheel them in, and we never got that moment, which was sad. But about a week later, I'm recovering at home and Kevin's still in the hospital, and Janet called and said he's going to be relisted. And at that point, I lost it on my sofa. Like, even the therapy dog was like, oh, so he doesn't like hugs, but he came over for a hug. He was like, something's wrong here. It turned out to be great, because he got another liver and he's here with us, and he's like made up all of that lost time and then some. But it was like, what did we do all of this for at the time? But what we did it for was to give him, my liver held on for a month while they secured another one for him. So what we did it for was to get him through that month, to get the liver that he's bouncing back. This is a very different Kevin than it was last summer around this time.
Yeah.
So this is a roller coaster of emotions. I don't even know how an individual could confront that. But here you are, and you said it took about a month with Dave's with a portion of Dave's liver. It took about a month for them to locate another match.
Yeah. So the day after the first surgery, I went in and had a second surgery to stabilize inside there where they were trying to make the connections. I actually ended up with 4 surgeries after the initial, 4 in total. After the initial surgery, I ended up having delusions. I had worked, as I mentioned, 20 years at Vandry, and so the hospital in my mind became Vandry, and my work family, whom I adore, became, anybody that walked past was like, hey, there's Michelle. Hey, come here, and I could, I don't like the way that's arranged. Let's change the furniture in here, and so talking to people that weren't there. At one point, things got very, very dark, and in my mind, I'd been wheeled down to the basement, and somebody was trying to set my bed on fire. Just going to those dark places, and I was yelling and hollering and pulling out drain tubes. At one point, I'm told I yanked out my catheter. I ended up in restraints, which you don't want to do because I was yanking things out. I was completely not in my head and not me. Through that whole process, people, now will say, hey, we were really praying for you, and what day was that? Oh, that was the day that I was in that dark place. So it's like, oh, okay, well,
it worked.
It worked, and I eventually came out of that. Because they had stabilized me, UNOS, who is the national organization that is in charge of donors, liver and kidneys and the whole thing, it all goes through UNOS. They had put me initially as number 1 in the nation of needing a liver, and they decided they were going to oppose that, just simply because I was relatively stable at that point, and there were other people in the country that were worse off than I was. And so we were on the list for about 4 weeks. The liver that I have now is a very healthy liver. It's a large liver, and it came through an unlikely source. UNOS really wasn't terribly involved in the liver that I have now, and so that was absolutely a miracle that I received the healthy liver that I have now.
When we walked into the studio, I noticed on Dave's vehicle there's a ribbon that talks about organ donation. What would you say, both of you, to any of our listeners? We'll start with you, Dave. We all know what our driver's license say, right? And that we can be organ donors. What would you tell somebody out there? Now, living donor and someone who's passed is two totally different things, but what would you say to someone who's thinking about being a living donor?
Well, for the driver's license one, that's a no-brainer. I mean, you can't take them with you, so if someone else can make use of them, tick that box. It does save lives. For living donation, I've had a lot of people say, I could never do that. I could never do that. And I would probably have been one of them had I been hearing this story, someone else tell this story. But when it's someone you know, it's super easy. It becomes super easy. And I lost my dad young, and Kevin's got two daughters. One's in college, one's in high school. And just like the thought of them possibly going through life without a dad made it super easy for me to go, well, let's get tested. And once I was approved, it was, let's do this thing. Let's lose the weight. Let's get in shape. Let's do the thing. So definitely do it. And it's not as scary as it sounds when you first start investigating it. And if anyone in Cadillac is thinking about doing this, reach out to me. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I will walk you through the process. I found a great person through Reddit that, sort of answered all of my questions. He was about 8 weeks ahead of me. So it was fantastic going from February to April with that guy, being able to go, so what about this? What about that? How are you feeling now? So if anyone's considering it, reach out to me. I will gladly answer any questions you may have about it that I can do. But definitely tick the box on your driver's license, and definitely don't say I could never do that because you probably could, especially if you know the person.
Kevin, anything you would tell somebody that's thinking about organ donation?
Similar to Dave is my perception of an organ donor prior to the surgery was kind of like, no, it's not something that I would do. It's an incredibly altruistic act. It's selfless. It's something that you're really not going to benefit from other than giving to somebody else and giving them life. My dad recently passed away here within this last month, and one thing that I wasn't aware of was that he had a desire to be an organ donor. And when we arrived at the hospital, we had made the decision as a family to take him off life support, and they wheeled him through the hall, and I don't know how they do it, but almost the whole staff of the hospital was standing in the hallways on both sides honoring my dad as he was wheeled down to the room where they were going to await the transplant team in order to have him be able to donate. Unfortunately, he lingered longer than what that time period is. There's a limited window. And so having just had a transplant and then seeing the other side with my dad was incredibly emotional and very meaningful. They had draped a Donate Life flag over his legs, and even just thinking about donation in general, the second surgery was delayed because they didn't have enough blood products. Giving blood is donating, and that's something that most all of us can do. So, thinking about donation on a broader scale, I've seen both sides of it, and it's a blessing that's hard to kind of wrap your mind around. Kind of the middle of the process, trying to mentally work through it. I felt pretty guilty that Dave was having to do this for me. And I felt, that a deceased donor, even though that person has passed away, that's a hard one to kind of put your mind around too. But seeing how hard Dave was working, I did have some feelings of guilt, and talking to him, he set me straight right away. This is something I chose to do. This is, don't steal my blessing. And
Awesome.
Again, his positivity kind of reset my thinking.
Going forward, Kevin, we're approximately 3 months post-op at this point. What are the biggest dangers you face? What are the lingering effects that you have that the doctors worry about at this point for your life?
Number one is always rejection.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm on medications that will help my body not reject the liver.
Those medications also are suppress your immunity, right?
Correct.
So you have to be really careful around.
Correct.
Yeah.
I actually have 2 autoimmune diseases. I have ulcerative colitis and I have the PSC. And initially coming out of the surgeries and getting released from the hospital, they say, your immune system is the same as a newborn baby. You don't have one.
Mm-hmm.
And so at that time, my dad was dying. He was in Saginaw. He had a massive brain bleed. And I desperately wanted to go and see my dad. I wanted to go say goodbye. I wanted to go and see him. And again, the staff at Henry Ford are incredible. And they said, okay, well, let's figure out how to make this happen. And so they released me after 9 weeks. It was awfully good not to be laying in a hospital bed. But, they set me up with some protective equipment and to be able to go in and see my dad and say my goodbyes. So there are ways of getting around it. Dealing with the side effects of all of the medications. If anybody's ever been on prednisone, they know that, it messes you up. Anytime you're dealing with steroids, the anti-rejection drugs have their side effects. I have tremors right now, which they say may need to adjust the drugs again. So it's the other side of it is I'm not an emotional person generally. I'm pretty steady even as you go, but the emotions creep up on you. All of a sudden you'll be in Myers buying Cracker Jacks and you break down crying. It's like, where did that come from and why? Well, it's a reaction from the medications.
Okay. A story of faith and courage.
There is you were friends to begin with, but there's a forever connection between you two now.
Yes.
Probably.
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 Well, we're very grateful that you guys chose to come in here and tell this story. So we really appreciate both of you, and we wish nothing but health and success for both of you.
God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cadillac Unscripted special edition today, sponsored by Independent Bank. Next week, same time, same station, some more local chats on 107.9 CDY. Thanks again to Dave Johnson and Kevin Graham.